Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome to the Laddie Community Heritage Honors Remembrance and Memorial Day, Community Education Forum, and Cultural Evening. This evening's proceedings is in collaboration with the Laddie Community Heritage and Honors Program, IPE Dare to Understand Enlightenment Series, the Grenada Education and Development Program, Grenada, Caribbean Freedom Fighters, the 50th Independence Subcommittee, History, Heritage, Identity, Documentation. It is indeed a great pleasure to have you here with us. And today, this evening, we have a very special guest with us. And the highlight of our evening will be the launch of Dr. Merle's Collins book, Ocean Stirring. At this time, I call the evening's proceedings to order, and I invite you all to stand as we pay homage to our country, which will be rendered on pan by one of the players, Miss Whitney, from the CBI Rainbow City All-Stars. So let's stand. Thank you. Thanks for that beautiful rendition. Don't sit us yet. Let us recognize the presence of our Creator in our midst as we reverently pray the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, amen. You can have your seat. I trust that you have enjoyed the beautiful steel pan rendition by the Rainbow City All-Stars. Thank you. Let's show appreciation to them. And that you are now in the right frame of mind and mood for a very interesting, informative, and educational session. At this time, I would like to invite the principal of the Holy Innocents Anglican School, Mrs. Claudia George Andrew, to give some brief remarks. Let's welcome her.
Good afternoon, everyone. Host and moderator, Marie Wells Marast. Co-host and moderator, Ms. Tesfa Aki-Peterson. Our guest speaker, special invited, and author, Dr. Merle Collins. Representative from Grenada, we have Ms. Abina Vincent. Representative of the 50th Independence Anniversary Committee, Ms. Jacqueline Smith. Other special invited guests, other specially invited guests, members of the Ladig community, we are very happy to have you here this afternoon. And a warm welcome to you. I am happy that you are here this afternoon at the Holy Innocents Anglican School, Ladig. This school is very special. It, of course, was the school of Louise Langdon Little, whom we are really featuring this afternoon. And I want to say, Dr.Merle Collins, she started a great work here 6 years ago, sparking a lot of interest as it relates to Louise Langdon Little, who we all know is the mother of Malcolm X. We have been hearing a lot about Malcolm X, and so we want to spark that same sort of enthusiasm as it relates to his mother, great activist, Louise Langdon Little. So we are very happy to have you here this afternoon. And we are looking forward to this book launch. I know that you are looking forward to it as much as I am. And also you're looking forward to our cultural evening. Already we have been hearing a lot of beautiful steel pan music. So we are going to be hearing some more of that and other cultural activities this afternoon. So I just invite you to sit and enjoy the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your words. And this evening, as I said earlier, it's in collaboration with a lot of persons who have seen and heard of what is happening and recognize the merit. And at this time, I would like to invite Ms. Jacqueline Smith, and she's a lead person for the parish, St. Andrew, under the National Organization Committee for the 50th Independence Celebrations. Let's welcome Ms. Jacqueline Smith to give some remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Permit me to stand on protocol established. A pleasant good afternoon. I'm here on behalf of the NOC, the National Organizing Committee, for our 50th anniversary of independence. We just celebrated our 50 under the theme, One People, One Journey, One Destiny. And I think we can all say that we had a very good 50th anniversary celebration. Can I say that? So give us a round of applause. All right. I'm standing here this afternoon representing Dr. Wendy Crawford, who is the chairperson of the NOC. And this activity this evening falls under the very ambit of one of the committees that was set up for the 50th anniversary celebration. There's a subcommittee which deals with history, heritage, and education and documentation. So this very event falls under our historical significance as a country. Now, our dear Prime Minister is very passionate about history. And you would have realized he'd take that bold stand of making history back into our schools. Not that it wasn't there, because I'm a student of history. I love history. But the significance, we make history become so like a subject of when you can't do anything else, you look to do history. But history is one that develops your critical thinking and make you sort of aware of where you come from and where you're going to go. So this afternoon, I want to commend the Ladig community. And to me, Holy Innocents is very special as well, That's where I started my teaching career 37 years ago. So I have a special bond with All Innocents. But as a community, I want to also encourage you that the information you have, one of the first programs that the NOC launched was the Mobile Museum. And the Mobile Museum is just documentation of things and events. So the information that you have here, I want to beg of the committee to create your own mobile museum and make it available to the NOC so that we can move it around in schools. You could you could call the Secretariat for more information, but it's just a compilation of events that we have on small mobile things that we move from school to school. So all this information is perfect. So I encourage you to do your mobile museum and make it available to us so that we can pass it around to the schools. Now, the event of the Committee for Independence is a one-year celebration. And so we continue to do things. Now, for St. Andrew, we hosted an event on the night of the 6th, but that is not really our month. Our month is in July. So we'd like to work along with you so that you can do your presentation there as well and make the awareness spread. So on behalf of the NOC, I would like to say congratulations to Ladi community, and we encourage other communities to bring out your heroes, celebrate your heroes. The National Committee cannot do it by themselves. Just recently, Pearl's community, they unveiled 2 plaques honoring Ben Jones, which is one of our past prime ministers, and Whipple Neda, who was a female parliamentarian. So the community of Ladig, you can also do something like that. So once again, on behalf of the NOC, Dr. Wendy Crawford, I would like to congratulate you, and I too look forward to the book launch and to reading the book myself. So thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith, for your kind words and for extending an invitation to us to further in this partnership so that we can spread the word and reach a wider audience. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I now invite our representative from Grenada, Ms. Marisol Joseph, to give some brief remarks. Ms. Marisol Joseph is a recipient of the Grenada Scholarship and a youth leader. Let's welcome Ms. Joseph.
Good afternoon, everyone. Permit me to stand on protocol already established. What is Grenada? Grenada is Grenada Education and Development Program, funded in 1996, governed by a voluntary board of directors. Grenada Education and Development Program is a non-governmental organization that is dedicated to youth empowerment and leadership, sustainable development. Grenada works to promote sustainable economic and social development by producing well-educated, socially engaged citizens and leaders with an emphasis on youths. Our mission: to work with youths in rural community, using education as a catalyst for individual and communal empowerment, leadership, and transformation. Our vision: to provide Grenada with educational opportunities and resources to achieve economic self-determination, social and poverty reduction. Programs that involve in Grenada: Grenada Science, Scholarship, leadership development training, and mentorship. Grenada places students with mature mentors that provide assistance throughout various stages of their school life and career path. These involve tutoring, engagement, support, and other personal growth and leadership modeling. Grenada also helps with leadership development, training which students help in their life skill, history of their country, and other personal development sessions that can help with spiritual, physical, and mentally growth and emerge leaders in every aspect of their lives. Grenada continues to be a catalyst for youth empowerment, not limited to academic, but all aspects of their lives. Thank you for including Grenada in this historical and cultural event. Once again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marisol, and it is indeed an honor. Remembering, memorializing, commemorating, honoring the life's journey and legacy of Louise Langdon Little, mother of Malcolm X. Who was Louise Langdon Norton Little? She was the mother of Malcolm X, working mother and activist. Helen Louise Langdon Little was born in La Digue, St. Andrew's Parish, Grenada in 1895. Her passport gives her date of birth as 28th November 1895. She was baptized at an Anglican church in the parish of St. Andrew, Grenada on February 12, 1896. Her baptism certificate gives her name as Helen Louise Langdon and her mother's name as Ella. Her mother is listed on her baptism certificate as a laborer whose abode is La Digue. When Helen Louise Langdon leaves Grenada for Montreal in 1917, her passport and the ship's manifest name her Louise Norton. The Norton last name for travel appears to give credence to her stories that her father was a Norton of the white Grenadian planter class. The autobiography of Malcolm X names Malcolm's grandfather a rapist, suggesting that he had heard stories of sexual abuse of his grandmother on a Grenadian plantation. The passport information suggests that the person who registered Helen Louise in official space gave her last name as Norton, and this was the name with which Helen Louise Langdon, now Louise Norton, traveled to Montreal. In Montreal, she met again with her uncle Egerton Langdon, who had migrated there earlier, arriving in 1914. Interested in Black political organization, Egerton had started a group in Montreal. Louise Langdon seems to have become part of her uncle's political organizing. The 1918 to 1919 period was the beginning of the establishment of Marcus Garvey's Pan-Africanist Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, in Montreal. Both Louise Langdon Norton and her uncle Egerton Langdon became part of organizational work in Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. 1919 was to be an important year for Louise Langdon Norton's life journey in other ways. She met a young preacher born in Butler, Georgia, USA, named Earl Little. He was visiting Montreal for church activity, as suggested by reasons given for entry to the country. And one might surmise, because of emergent Black political organization in Montreal. The two young people, Earl Little, 28, soon to be 29, and Louise Langdon Norton, 23, soon to be 24, met and married in 1919. Later that same year, Helen Louise, now known as Louise Little, traveled with her new husband to his home country, the United States of America. For the next 20 years, she will be an activist organizer within Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, and will give birth to 8 children, one of whom, Malcolm X, will become known as an inspiring political activist and a strong voice in the struggle for Black justice throughout the world. Louise Langdon Norton Little's life of struggle, work within the UNIA, and activist involvement both in public and within the home merit their own recognition. As Grenadian Calypsonian Elwyn McQuilkin, the mighty wizard, sings, "She must be remembered too." Here's the reason we are here today. At this time, I would like to introduce you to my co-host and moderator, Ms. Tesfa Aki Patterson. Tesfa Patterson is a PhD student in the Humor PhD program doing research on Grenadian communities at home and in the diaspora. Her research grounds thinking around the diaspora in the everyday concerns of Grenadian community members, both at home and overseas. It does so by immobilizing multivocal, situated, co-creative ethos of knowledge, creation that foregrounds dialogical, collaborative, and reciprocal modes of engagement that links local and diaspora community sites. Ms. Tesfa Patterson, she's sitting right on the table, in case you were wondering who is this beautiful young lady on the table next to us. To do the introductory note on Dr. Merle Collins, I invite Ms. Abina Vincent, a teacher, cultural activist, theater arts teacher, and English teacher, to give some remarks from Dr. Decimal Williams and the introductory note on Dr. Merle Collins. Let's welcome Ms. Abina Vincent.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Special good afternoon to Dr. Collins and our animators, and to you, our specially invited guests, a pleasant good afternoon. I stand here to share a special note from Dr. Williams on behalf of Grenada. Dear country, sisters, and brothers, as we continue to bask in our 50th anniversary, I greet and congratulate all, especially the family and community of our grandmother, aunt, sister, friend, and dear mother of our Malcolm X. It is a beautiful day when we can recognize a woman who made something special of her life, combating challenges along the way. We surely salute and celebrate our sister, Professor Merle Collins, for her continuing contributions to the intellectual life of Grenada, the Grenada. Education and Development Program Grenada is proud of you. Thanks to you and your organization for organizing today. Knowing our history and finding meaning in all of it contributes to development and transformation, and Professor Merle is definitely making her sterling and historic contributions. We thank and encourage you. I urge the Laddie and Holy Innocents communities to continue to be proud and to popularize Louise and Malcolm, our heroine and hero. Knowledge brings us independence and freedom. I am sitting in the beautiful parliamentary of revolutionary Angola and will visit the statue of former Queen Nzinga, who inspired the fight against colonialism 4 centuries ago. Wishing for writers among our youth and for continued knowledge to bring us greater independence and higher freedom. On the cusp of International Women's Day, a salute to all women for full equality and end of violence against women and girls. A happy Sunday to all. Decima Williams from the neighboring village of Grambra. Okay. And now I am tasked with the responsibility to introduce our dear friend, professor, writer, it's a lot, great shoes to fill in. And it's also on behalf of Dr. Decima Williams again. Only 6 weeks ago, our beautiful community welcomed Amy Jones. Her third publication, Mamina. Mamina is a biographical presentation of a mother who nurtured her daughter, now turned author. The strength of character was one of the key features of the mother, which was passed on to the author, and gradual, if not unexpected, the outcome was flowering of both. Now today, two women, giants, stride among us once again. As one, the author, Merle Collins, who has captured the very essence of another woman, Louise Little. In a similar trope, that recurring theme of women fulfilling their lives in ways seen as unexpected for the given era in which the women find themselves and making such meaningful contributions. Collins is the senior threader in the narrative of connecting the generations who embody our aspirations. In her 1989 autobiographical novel, Angel, our host of honor today, one of Grenada's most accomplished writers, Professor Merle Collins, introduced us to the idea that here in Grenada, the movement from being a little girl, to becoming an adult female is a journey fraught with the unexpected, dangerous, and adventurous, but that such a life journey is therefore worth observing and telling. And she has been chronicling and telling the stories and the journeys of women such as Dame Hilda Baino and others. This is why today's book launch fits in that history, into Grenada's history, women's history. In Ocean Stirrings, Merle Collins pays tribute to Louise Langdon, a young girl from Ladigue land, as Wizard would say. What an appropriate place, space, and time to celebrate Louise as immigrant woman, activist, educator, mother, who launched herself as a tower of ambition and who may have looked back, but despite the many odds, never gave up. Collins breathes life into Louise's story, highlighting themes such as mental illness, a topic misunderstood by many here in our region, and the complementary role of formal education. Collins therefore sends a message to all of us about our lives. Merle Collins began writing as a young woman and launched her first collection of poetry, Because the Dawn Breaks, published in 1985. Collins has continued to research, to teach, and as Anna Broadber, a Jamaican writer, says, to serve as an intellectual worker. Some of her most important work has been documenting and inspiring local communities about the sanctity and the validity of their beliefs, practices, hopes, and dreams of Grenada's rural communities, as they practice cultural art forms such as Saraka, one of Grenada's African community celebrations. Merle Collins is a daughter, professor, writer, poet, friend, and pride of Grenada. Please join me in welcoming our griot, our storyteller, Dr. Merle Collins.
As we get ready to delve into the first segment of the book, We will have a cultural interlude in the form of a poem, which will be done by Anderson Richardson, titled Journey to 50. Let's welcome Anderson. Thank you.
Right, good afternoon to everybody. Please permit me to stand on protocol already established. And happy am I to stand in the midst of such an esteemed woman, Dr. Merle Collins, and my most esteemed former teacher, Ms. Peterson. I am so happy to see you. I am very happy to see you. My name is Anderson Richardson, and I am originally from Shantimel St. Patrick's. I am a member of the Writers Association of Grenada. I am a social worker by profession. I now live at Mali St. Patrick's. And I wrote a piece. It's titled The Journey to 50. From humble beginnings, she came, surviving through much hurts and pains. She depended heavily on agriculture as one of her main food pillars. Being first colonized by the French and later the British, was ceded to Britain by the Treaty of Paris. She was called Conception Island by Christopher Columbus, an island of mineral wealth and its inhabitants ingenious. Grenada gained her independence in 1974, that milestone that allowed her to glow. February 7th should be inscribed on every Grenadian's heart score, for the reign of colonial rule is no more. Her fertile soil and lush green vegetation can be seen throughout the entire nation. The warmth and resilience of her people, building again from the rubble. Being shattered by Hurricane Ivan in 2004, many thought that this island will be no more. The level of destruction was so bad, but thanks to her people who worked real hard. Great nation builders were nurtured by her. The world now hails that great superstar. Out of the ashes, she continued to rise, the home of nature, a beautiful paradise. A tropical climate filled with lovely beaches, the home of wildlife of many species. She boasts of oil dung as her national dish, the pride of the Caribbean, every tourist wish. Happy Independence, Grenada, and may God bless you. For people talk, but few can walk in your shoe. Your level of resilience is beyond imagination as you continue to move forward to the next generation. I thank you.
What a talent, what a skill, what a way to paint pictures with words. He indeed captured the journey to 50. Thank you and well done. An enjoyable poem, meaningful, quite fitting. At this time, I'll hand you over to our co-host, Ms. Tesfa Patterson.
I take a lot of credit for that, Anderson. You know? Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. It's such a wonderful pleasure that you allow a Shantimelian, two Shantimelians now, to share in the work that is happening in La Digue. As Dr. Williams noted in the words that she sent to us, this is collective work. This is the work of all of us in the length and breadth of Grenada, and those of us who call Grenada home but are forced to live away from it. And so it's always a pleasure for me to be here. We're getting there. We get into the good part, I promise you. But before we get there, I'd like to introduce the lady who has been leading the way for us this whole time, my equally beautiful co-host, Miss Marie Wells-Marast, a teacher at the St. Andrew's Anglican Secondary School. She began her teaching career at the Grenada Boys Secondary School 17 years ago. I don't believe that. She looked too young. She 19 now, she say. She's a qualified teacher of English language and literature and history, certified by the University of the West Indies, Joint Board of Teacher Education. She holds a Bachelor of Laws from the University of London and is currently pursuing a legal practice certificate and MSc in Law, Business and Management from the University of Law, London. My beautiful co-host and Ladigian, Marie Wells Marast. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to take us into what we're all here for. I have been so eagerly anticipating listening to Dr. Merle Collins read her words in her own voice. There is nothing more beautiful than that for me. And what we have this evening, as she crucially likes to point out, is a fictive rendering of the life of Louise Langdon. She always reminds us, this is not true, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the truth. This is a work of historical, or what she calls documentary fiction. And if you have been following the journey of Ocean Stirrings, you'll see that Dr. Collins came up with this tome of over 300 and something words just from a paragraph in the autobiography of Malcolm X. She has said that just reading, not even a paragraph, it's about 2 sentences. Those 2 sentences that Alex Haley, through the words of Malcolm X, wrote about his mom, Helen Louise Langdon, sparked a world in the imagination of Dr. Collins. And from that world emerged all of the archival research, all of the beautiful Creole. I encourage you strongly. I'm going to make a pitch right at the beginning. Get the book, read the book, reacquaint yourself with the voices of an 1890s Grenadian village. Reacquaint yourself with Grenadian Creole. And from those simple 2 or 3 sentences, Dr. Collins was able to track down a lot of very important historical information. So the story itself, like she likes to say, might be a work of fiction and of the imagination, but many of the events, the histories, the archives that you encounter in the reading are very real. These are things that happened in the life of Grenada. And so it is my pleasure this evening to pass the mic to Dr. Collins as she takes us into the beginning stages of our main character in Ocean Stirrings, Ocean. Ocean is in Ladigue, and Dr. Collins is going to let us know what's happening there.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is really wonderful to be here again. The last time that I was here, it was an overwhelming experience being in Louise Langdon's primary school. So here we are again, and Tespa has already given you a little bit about, the motivation, the way I went into this work. I want to also say, even before I delve into this, that not only is it a pleasure to be here among you, it is also a pleasure to be here and seeing again my cousin Claudia George, who is the principal of this school. And I know Tesfa is looking surprised because she didn't know before this that the principal of this school was actually a relative. So I'm very pleased to be here. And I want to say, imagine Louise Langdon was at this school in 1890. Sorry, she was born in Ladigue in 1895. She was baptized on the 12th of February, 1896. So during that whole first part of the 20th century, she was at school in La Digue, in Holy Innocents, and at first it seems to me from the research that Holy Innocents School didn't even appear on the books. It was later on, around 1909, that's the first time I can find it, that it actually is there as an Anglican school in this area, an Anglican school in St. Andrews. But here I must give some credit to Terence Wilson, who is a family member, who, when I first started to research Helen Louise, when I say a member of the Langdon family, when I first started to research Helen Louise, Terence was very gracious and talked to me a lot about the family in this area, his own life in La Digue and surroundings. I was hoping to see him today. I don't think I see him, at least I haven't seen him yet, so if he's there, he's hiding. But I want to acknowledge that that was a very important part of my research. I want to say that from the research, I know that in 1891, the Grenada Handbook tells me that there were 1,679 people in Grenville. When I listen to what people say about Malcolm X's mother, I see that they keep saying she was a very educated woman. But as I research, I'm not seeing anything on the books beyond Holy Innocents Primary School. And as I look at that and the Holy Innocents Primary School of the period, I say, okay, she got a lot of important basic stuff from there. And I noticed that the Legislative Council minutes at one point also say that the teachers at Holy Innocents are good. Even if it seems that this school is not recognized as one of the combined schools, and they gave the schools that were more highly regarded the name combined schools, so that even if Holy Innocents was not on the list as one of the combined schools, the representative for the area, Mr. Seaton Brown at the time, kept saying there are some very good teachers at Holy Innocents. So all of those kinds of, all of that kind of historical material had an impact on my shaping of the novel and my characterization, for example, of an individual like Sir, who was one of Ocean's teachers and who really, guided her a lot. Let me just let you get a sense of the voice. This part of the novel, the beginning, is set in 1896, and I'll read two short sections, one from here and one from somewhere else in the novel. It's 1896, a La Digue morning, and I'm reading the section so you get a sense of the language. From the hills of La Digue, they can look down at the ocean, talking secret to the sands, shoo-shooing, playful, intimate, running up and easing back, down there near l'Abbé, the tongue that is theirs. People say it is the second tongue of the island, Grenada, but for those who live there, l'Abbé, which some also call Grenville, is the first. Sometimes tongue people act as if tongue, which is what they call St. George's, the capital, is the center. But to people around l'Abbé, their tongue is really the main place for everything. For good kingfish from the sea, for crayfish from the river mouth, for a nice new market these days, for cocoa, now that cocoa is in swing, for nutmeg, for everything. It is where they meet and greet each other, by Mr. Lamotte Liquor Store, by Mr. Rennie on Victoria Street, by the Revenue Office, by the Colonial Bank Agency, by the market. They pretend not to see Miss Dudus, as underneath as ever, standing up at the corner by the pillar box, watching everything and waiting to run him out. Or Mr. Joseph waiting by that same pillar box in his khaki shirt and khaki pants, waiting to see the government workers clear the mail out of the pillar box at 2:30, waiting as if somebody paying him to do that job. Fast, so they're thinking. But there is nothing of that in their shouts to one another. Hey, how things? And what you know good? Saukadilla, epi tiffy, you got a belly, girl, you looking nice, yes? And you don't have to tell me something in the mortar besides the pestle. Upan nipu dimo any kesho in a pillow up as a mashla. Epi, wo yo, demo and plasla. Trouble in the place. Sometimes they have to help up two languages, daylang, to tell the story going on around them. Sometimes one is enough. And always they laugh out loud, sounding gleeful, as if they have secured the secret to survival. Not that life is easy. Life has never been easy. Sometimes on the hill in La Digue and the surrounding areas, when the rain don't fall to water the hillside land, and when the estate, acting as if laborer is river dog, things hard like boli, which is the name their ancestors left them for the calabash. But anyway, God good. Papa Bonje bon. And they're making it. So that's the beginning. And notice that the setting is 1896. And that Creole is very strong in the island, and it's very strong, especially in rural areas. So I just had to use it for the novel. In this section, we are with Ocean, who is the central character of the novel. We are with Ocean at school. And again, I'll read a short section and then pause so that I can be interrogated. Ma tells every teacher at Holy Innocent School that if they had any time after school to explain things to her granddaughter, Ocean, and give her extra lessons, she would pay. Because, she said, education is important and she wants her granddaughter to start early. The teachers knew that for up to 2 hours after school, Ocean could stay back and get extra time to have things explained to her because her grandmother would pay, even up to 6 pence altogether during the term for the extra lessons. She would have money from the 2 pence that Oba had put aside from doing all the carpentry for himself, and from what Iro would give her sometimes now, because he was doing carpentry just like his father, and because she worked in the garden in their own piece of land and could sometimes bring corn and peas and yams and things like that to sell in the market in Labi. And of course, whoever was teaching her granddaughter would get something when peas in season, or when Julie Mango bear, or when French cashew in season, and she had something to give. And sometimes the chickens would lay, so they could get 2 eggs or even a chicken self, or something to keep the body going. Mr. Ansel was in charge of giving lessons himself and of talking to other teachers to see if one of them thought it would help to have an extra lesson with Ocean. Sometimes they would tell Ocean to go home because she had done enough for the day. The teachers marveled that Ma Miriam was one of the main parents in the area pushing for her child or for her grandchild to get an education. They were the ones who had to take attendance, so they knew that for many parents, Monday and Friday were not real school days. If she hadn't sent her own children to school, people would say, she only doing that because the granddaughter have little color. Because some people are like that, you know, taking on the children with light skin more than the others. But Ma Miriam, not she. She believed in education from time. You could see that. All the children went to school, even when the school was quiet down in Labby. Perhaps the little ones didn't go as regular when the school was far away and they had to walk down there and the ground hot, but they go so they could read and write. But still, people couldn't help thinking she had a special spot for this little one. And although people would want to put color in front, they couldn't honestly say that for Ma Miriam. So they're thinking, is how the child come into the world and how Ma Miriam want to make sure that her grand make it in spite of everything. So I knew that Ocean had to be really sick for Ma to let her miss one day. You could depend on seeing that little girl there on the front bench. Ma had walked Ocean to school herself that first day, although she had a bigger sister or aunt or whatever in the school. It was Ma who put her to sit down on the bench and who announced to Ocean and to Mr. Ansel, the teacher, that is your seat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. See what I told you? I mean, we don't want it to stop, but we do have questions. At this time, we're going to delve a little bit more into some of the themes that Dr. Collins has interwoven into the story of Ocean, and we're going to do it in an alternate fashion. So I'm going to pass the mic now over to Marieve, and
Thank you. And wow, I read the book myself, but hearing it in your voice, wow. Thank you. And the first piece that you chose falls and so well in terms of my first question on language revitalization. One of the first things that hit me when I read the book was the use of language. And it is skillfully interwoven, all the different varieties. You hear the formal language of the school setting. You hear the Grenadian Creole, not just our English base, but the patois. And I just want to know, Merle, how challenging was it, right? Given that our vernacular is predominantly oral, how challenging it was for you to interwove the French patois into your novel. What inspired you to do so? And would you say that including the French patois as an attempt at language revitalization?
Okay, thank you for that question. I mean, there's a lot in there, but it's revitalization, yes, but I wouldn't call it only an attempt at revitalization. It is also revitalization if that is what people want. You know what I mean? It is an attempt to make people realize that this is an important part of our history, that it is there. And then, of course, the decision is there for people to make. But that French Creole, in those years, 1895, 1896, 1900, up to that first part, 1910. Well, beyond that first part, that Creole was very important in the Grenadian story. People spoke the language. In fact, I am told that my great-grandmother, who is also from a rural area, Hermitage, I am told that my great-grandmother, that was her only language. Yes? So that in fact, in the family, that is also there. Now, my mother, who is 103, yes, you could clap. My mother, still, as she's lying there, she is muttering things in that Creole, right? That French Creole. So that in fact, I hear it. I still hear it. When I was growing up, I heard the language spoken. Usually it was my mother and my aunt speaking to one another, yes? So that it was there in the language being spoken around me. And you know, I want to say that we have to think of the setting for this novel. And as Tesfa kept insisting, because she had heard me insist that too, that it's a novel, but it's a novel set in the historical scaffolding. So I'm not telling you that I sit down in a people's house and I hear what they say, so this is it, right? So that's not, so it is a story, it's invention, it's a novel. It's a tribute to Louise Little. So that from researching her life, I thought, you know, this is what would have been happening. Let me bring my imagination to bear on this and see if I can create a story. And I'll come back to that second part of the question in a minute, but let me say, I want to address something that Tesfa had said earlier when she mentioned that it all started for me when I read something in the autobiography of Malcolm X, and what I read was this. My mother, Louise Little, who came from Grenada in the British West Indies, looked like a white woman. Her father was white. She had straight black hair, and her accent did not sound like a Negro's. Of this white father of hers, I know nothing except her shame about it. She said that she had never seen him. You know, and I thought, wow, that is a huge, huge story in itself. Because obviously, to me, as I read that, this is about plantation. This is about the colonial plantation. This is about the, you know, sexual activity on the plantation, the master relationships with little black girls on the plantation, etc. And then when I go to the records and I see baptized on this particular date and her mother is named a laborer, you know, and I listen to different stories within the family, I say, okay, I have to bring my imagination to bear on this and in fact sort of create a story from it. So you see what I mean when I say it was inspired by? The historical scaffolding is there. You can hear a lot of the names that I mentioned, for example, by Mr. Lamont, Liquor Store, by Mr. etc., etc. Those names, appear in one or other of the Grenada handbooks for 1895, 1896. These were indeed merchants or liquor store dealers, etc., in Grenville at the time. So that history, that scaffolding is correct. When I say it's correct, that's the historical part. So when I say it's a historical novel, you think, all right, so what are the historical parts in here? It's that thing around, that holding up this story, but it's invented in there. So where the language is concerned, let me come back to that last part. And no, I won't answer all questions this long, so I won't take so much time for each answer. So, you know, you don't need to worry. But I want to point out, you know, sometimes we forget, or perhaps because of how we've looked at the history, we don't even focus on this. But Grenada was in French hands for a whole 116 years, you know, from 1650 until 1762. And I know there are historians in the audience, so if you're thinking, I'm not claiming I'm moonlighting in history, I love it, but I'm not claiming to be the trained historian. So historians, if you hear me saying anything that's sounding a little bit off, say, all right? But Grenada was in French hands for roughly 116 years, you know? And then, in fact, there's another little piece there. And after that 116 years, when by the Peace of Paris, Grenada was handed over to the British. Look at this. Between 1783, and in fact, it was actually the beginning, yes? It was actually between 1784, January 1784, and by 1838, we have emancipation. So that's the period of British control before, you know, we move into so-called freedom. So what is happening here is people on the plantations are speaking this French Creole, and it goes right through the 19th century, early 20th century, early to mid 20th century. It's very much there, and I've told you it's there still in my mother's voice, in that generation, the 90s and 100s. So yes, so to answer the second part of the question, I had to research it. Okay. Because I don't speak the Creole. You hear me showing off with the little words and things like that. But I know some words. I have a sense of pronunciation because I always heard it growing up. I know some things, especially growing up, the things that parents would shout at you, or, you know, things they would say because essentially it was their secret language. And I did research. I spoke to Morgan Dalfinis from St. Lucia, who is a researcher on Caribbean and African languages. I've been speaking to Morgan about language since I wrote my first novel, Angel. I said, look, I know the Grenadian Creole. We talk it all the time, but I never write it. How would you write this? So I spoke to the researchers. I am, in fact, presently taking a Creole class. Interestingly, with a Trinidadian who lived in Grenada for a while and became fascinated by the Creole. So it's an online class. So the interest is there.
Thank you for that response and explanation. And it reminds us, or tells us to always keep in mind that our history or the language is part of our history, and it helps set the setting and the stage. And yes, it has been, as you say, used to speak, you know, secretly among the adults, but it's there. And I must applaud your efforts, and it was aptly captured and interwoven in the book, and I see that it is a work of passion, and it's coming through. Tesfa?
Thank you, Marie. I don't think I have to be this close to the mic. I think I'm good. At this time, we're going to turn to a character in the book that all of us know, Ma Miriam. All of us know that the person in my life that was Ma Miriam was Auntie Jane, our great-grand aunt, somebody who always was talking in parables, always telling you need to pick sense from nonsense. Book sense is not common sense. You know, Miriam is a huge figure in the book. And she does take on the role of a caregiver. She's the one taking care of the family, but she's also an astute observer of life. She's somebody who is very influential to Oceane's reading of the world. She's the voice in her head. She's the one that she writes letters to when she's far away from her. And reading Ocean Stirrings reminded me of other similar figures in the work of Dr. Collins. And I want her to talk to us about that interplay between what Marie called informal and formal education, and how critical Ma, as a political actor, as somebody who was thinking with a sort of political consciousness in a very colloquial shell. When your grandmother tell you pick sense from nonsense, you know she speak a book, right? So talk to us about Ma.
Yes. My novel, you know, she's really important indeed. And as you say, when your grandmother tell you pick sense from nonsense, is she talking a whole book and more? And Ma is constantly speaking in this way and constantly remembering things in this way. And in a sense, Ma is not only inspired by my thinking of Louise Little's grandmother, but my thinking of generations of women who have done this and who continue to do this. So that in a way we can say that Oceane's education was not only from the school, but also from that kind of nurturing in the home, To some extent, for me, it is kind of appealing to us to value that. Sometimes we think people who don't have a formal education, or at least we act as if we think, because I don't think we could really think that, you know, who don't have a formal education, don't have that wisdom. And that we know from our lives that that is very untrue. So the kind of wisdom that Ma has, lots of other women of that generation, yeah? Lots of other women within our own families have that wisdom. So that is very deliberately done in the novel. And you know, I keep coming back to this theme because it is there in this novel, and it is also there in other things that I've written. You know, there's always a figure like that who might not have, as you say, at least not might not have, who does not have the PhD or the MA or whatever, but the importance of that education to the child, you know, is very, very apparent. So that's Ma's character.
Ma paying all she liquor 2 pence for Ocean to go to school. Yes.
And so we heard about Ma, and Ma had a husband. Ma's husband was Pupa Oba. And I observed that Pupa Oba was not the typical kind of Grenadian man, or exuded the typical kind of Caribbean masculinity. I felt that Pupa Oba offered us a different view of the Grenadian male. Yes, he was a breadwinner. We heard that he went out and he did the carpentry and he provided for his family. But there was this quiet masculinity that he exudes. How far would you go, or in agreeing with my observation, that Pupa Oba was not a typical Grenadian male that we might be familiar with?
All right. I mean, this is the point at which I should say, well, me, you know, who is the typical male you're familiar with, but
you know,
but
like
yeah, I know, absolutely, I know, I'm just teasing, I know. But yes, and very often, you know, we critique the approaches. And here, the thing is, to some extent, to a large extent, yes, Papa Oba is there for his family. When he is in the rum shop and he hears the men talking about little girls, and by the way, when I constructed that rum shop in the novel, I was thinking of it right in the corner down there. So when he hears the rum shop, when he hears the men in the rum shop talking about little girls, especially after his young daughter just got pregnant, he cannot participate. He listening, but he ain't saying too much, and he's definitely not feeling good about it, because he knows what he's experiencing within his family. So, to some extent, I would say I wrote a very kind of positive characterization of Pupa Oba. But there are things I also left to the imagination. I say, well, you know, let people decide if Pupa Oba could be kind of sneaky sometimes, in truth, yeah? If there are things we really don't know about him. And remember that Ma Miriam had a friend who say, well, you know, if that's the way you want to think about man, you go ahead. I know, all right? So you have that too from other voices, you know, people. And when she first met Pupa Oba as a young man on the estate in St. David's, when she first meets him on the estate, people are telling her, he looking nice to you and thing, but hey, that man I bright to do, man. You know, and those kind of things. Yeah. And I never get into it in the novel to say whether that is indeed true, you know, but we know that Pupa Oba in the home is a person who is very supportive. So to some extent, I leave some things to the imagination.
Yes, and as you said that now, it reminds me of a part when Ocean came from school, and she was always sharing with Ma, and that poem, The Old Woman in the Shoe with So Many Children, and then Ma's response is like you're wondering if Ma had some sort of experience. So that is true.
Yes.
It leaves, yes.
Yeah, there are some things, and of course they're wondering what you're talking about now.
Oh.
But yes, there are some things you're not too sure about, and you could
Yes.
see that Ma has her own experiences. She's not sharing everything with Ocean, but sometimes her responses kind of make you wonder. And also, for that particular poem, The Old Woman in the Shoe, Ma gives an answer that makes Ocean think, because Ocean say, look, we do this poem in school. We do this nursery rhyme in school. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. Yeah, people saying it too, yeah? Right? She gave them some broth without any bread, whipped them all songly, and sent them to bed. So when Ocean is saying they really like it, there was such a nice nursery rhyme in the book and thing like that, Ma say, huh? Yeah, I suppose it's nice, especially for those who don't have to live in shoes. Right? So Ma is always saying things like that, to make you think. The nursery rhyme might seem quite innocuous, but Ma has a take on it. And it seems to me that is realistic. When I say realistic to our Caribbean lives, that people, the older people in our lives, very often, at least for me, and I mean, that might be me now for you, but anyway, the older people in our lives very often, give responses that make you think about things more deeply.
Tessa?
Thank you so much. Well, another masculine figure in the book that is really important to Ocean's story in Grenada and later on her diaspora story is her Uncle Ero. And her Uncle Ero is the character in the book that I would say kind of challenges the norms of the day. He is in town talking to people about what's going on in the Legislative Council. He's going away to work in Panama and coming back with a flashy gold chain. He's going to Canada and sending Ocean Garveyite literature. And I want to imagine Uncle Ero had he remained in Grenada. Given the social and political status quo of the day in Grenada, what would Uncle Ero's prospects have been as somebody who was obviously very politically conscious and really challenging the norms? Later on, just after Uncle Ero leaves, the West Indian becomes a reality of Grenadian life. What do you think Uncle Ero would have put his energies in Grenada? Another work of fiction.
Thank you for that question. And again, Uncle Ero is like so many people who have traveled from Grenada and other parts of the Caribbean, and who make their choices, stay here or go away. And Uncle Ero is patterned to some extent off Louise Langdon's uncle, Edgerton, who left Grenada in 1914. And I look at the way in the novel Uncle Ero is constructed as having all these ideas about Garvey, as you say, and teaching Ocean. Your question to me is almost, I know, it's almost like, all right, write another novel and imagine, yes. And imagine Uncle Ero not going and staying in Grenada. And I like the question because it also makes me think that both Ocean and Uncle Ero left the country at the point when another historical figure, T.A. Marichaud, was emerging in Grenada. So remember, so that the West Indian, for example, T.A. Marichaud started the West Indian in 1915. So you have this young man speaking about the possibilities for Grenada. And it is clear that that Marichaud had an impact on the thinking of Louise Little. Now notice I'm moving from the fictional character to the real life one who inspired my creation of this fictional character. Because Louise Little left Grenada in 1917, 2 years after Marichaud started the West Indian. Her son, Wilfred Little, tells us that his mother used to give them the West Indian to read. She used to give them Garvey's paper and would also give them the West Indian to read. So in the novel, when I think of Uncle Ero, I conceptualize him as having been influenced by Marichaud, even before he left Grenada. And also, Ocean was influenced again, and Marichaud appears as his name, a historical figure in the novel, was influenced by Marichaud even before she left Grenada. So when they are out there, they already have these political ideas going for them. So in fact, they pick up where they left off. There are different things happening in Canada, there are different things happening in the United States, and they fit in and become political activists. But they had already had that incipient political interest in Grenada. So I would say perhaps if Uncle Ero were here, if he had remained here, my sense is that he would have been along with Marichaud or something. And I pause here also to say we cannot discount the influence of people around us, because Marichaud himself, who became an important political figure, left school at 16 and went to work in Donovan's office, the Grenada Federalist, what is it? Federalist and Grenada people? What? That's what it is, right? Right. So he worked in that office, and Donovan looked at this young man and thought, he's good. I must give him books to read. I must, so that kind of nurturing was important there. And my sense is that a similar kind of nurturing could have happened, coming from Marichaud, the young people. When Louise Langdon was 15, Marichaud was in his early 20s. So, that influence on members of the family was also very important.
I imagine something very similar. So and I'm waiting for the next book about Uncle Ero. At this time, we're going to give you a chance to ask some questions of Merle. We're going to give 10 minutes to the audience. There's a mic. If you have a question, you can go to the mic and ask it. Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here and I'm so intrigued because my mother was born in 1926, right? She's still alive. And some of the things you were saying, you'd have seen me nodding, because the way you explained the tongue and the same names that you called. I remember my mother telling me about these people who were the Pattersons in the area, who owned the shops, what happened. So right away I was able to identify with the story. And to me, the mother there wanting to make sure that her child was well educated, to me, the women of these days saw the importance of education, because the very said way you describe it, to me, is how my mother dealt with us in the family. There was nothing but rainy days, or you had to be really sick to stay home, whether you thought the teacher was doing anything. Lessons were, important. And so they had this lust to see their children educated. And I could identify straight away that with my mother. Everybody just had to be, And I like how you put it. The women of the day didn't have a PhD. But I will accredit a lot of what I learned from my mother. My mathematics skill and ability, my counting skill, everything I would attribute it to my mother. And a lot of these sayings that you had, to each his own, all these little sayings. When you look at it, how much it empower you now as an individual. When you started the part about the Panama Canal, men going to the Panama Canal, my mother told me that story. She never knew her father, but she knew he left to go to the Panama Canal when so the book is like I'm just sitting there, and it's like these women are the same story. You understand? So I was not stuck now. Well, mommy tell me that, because we make the joke sometimes. Sometimes this man come back from Panama and says my grandfather or something. So it's so much, I'm identifying through my mother, what she told me, a lot of the story. But I want to emphasize to us as young people now how important education is and how much, we should put emphasis on it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that comment. Thank you for that comment. And I say how important education is and how much we should value those beginnings. At the time, the first education ordinance in Grenada was, I believe, in 1882, just a few years before Louise Langdon was born. Yeah? So your comments make me think of the way this is not only Louise Langdon's story, but it's everybody's story. And what is precious to me is hearing you say, you're joking somebody and say, but that was the same kind of story that my mother told me. So the effect of this then is to have other people think, wow, this is an important story, right? Our story is not unimportant. I have a story that I can talk about, So some people might be thinking, the writers might be thinking, hi, there's a story I can write here, And I think that is of tremendous importance, because it's that's a historical fiction thing, And notice I keep emphasizing the fiction. So don't go and I'd say what happened in the people's house. That's not it at all, right? But the historical scaffolding is there. So because you recognize the Pattersons and the Lamotts and that kind of thing, right? So that scaffolding. And by the way, in the beginning, in the early days of the education ordinance, we didn't have as many people going to school, but it happened gradually. So that, for example, one of the books says that in Grenada in I don't remember which year it is, but between 1895 and 1902, there were 7,200, I jotted it down, 7,025 students on the rolls for primary school, but the average attendance was 3,569. So you see, that's the beginning, which makes us value more the approaches of Louise Langdon's grandmother, who say, children ain't going to school, my little girl going to go. right? So the fact that Louise Langdon went to school at that point and got to Standard 5 at a point when the Legislative Council was saying, you know, the rural children, we don't really have to educate them beyond Standard 4, because what is happening here, we want the rural children to be laborers. You know, so that was the attitude of the colonial legislative council. But people like Louise Langdon's grandmother decided that their children will go to school. And that is, we have to value this as the beginnings of, you know, the shaping of a whole generation of young people.
There is something more to do there. When you spoke about the primary level education, and there must have been something going on at the primary level.
Ms. Smith, hold on a minute.
I would just want to make note of that too. You said that she only reached the primary level, right? Mm-hmm. But my mother only reached the primary level too. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the things I understand at the secondary level, like person in language, first person, second person. My mother taught me all these things, so that means to say that the primary school was of high standard. So even if you didn't make it to a secondary school in those days, the amount you got from the primary school, because a lot of things I understand in grammar in Form 4 and 5 was again from my mother, and she didn't go beyond Standard 6 or somewhere there in the primary school. So I'm saying that this again I can identify with.
I mean, when you read the book, you'll see that the colonial royal reader is another character in the book as well, right? At this time, I would like also to let the online audience know that they're free to post questions under the live of the event. And if there are no more questions in the audience, we will take a break from this first segment and have a little bit of a cultural interlude, and we'll come back with the second segment. Thank you so much for your participation.
So at this time, we'd like to welcome Shamal Copeland to do a poem entitled His Story. Let's welcome Shamal.
Thank you very much. I don't know about all of you, but being here, I just feel a bit overwhelmed, not just because it's a book launch, etc. I have to perform, but the fact that I'm here with Dr.Merle Collins. And when I was growing up, I remember when I was thinking about writing, I would see other authors such as Michael B. Anthony in Trinidad, etc., who wrote Green Days by the River. And I was wondering, does Grenada have any writers like that? And I'm not saying that there aren't other renowned authors at the time, but I remember Dr. Merle Collins was one of the people who really stood out when I looked for them, notably. And while we have a lot of authors now, Grenadian authors, and a whole Grenada Published Authors Association, I just feel a little bit humbled right now. I'm going to be sharing a piece here because the content of this book seemed very cultural, etc., given the content of the nature and Malcolm X's mother, etc. And this piece is from a show that the Writers Association of Grenada, which I'm a part of, did, called Voices, and I hope that you all enjoy it. Let me tell you a story from a friend of mine who wasn't so close, at most a rival, a shadowy form, convinced his darkened light wasn't meant to shine, though I snuffed out any sliver that came to be. He spoke to me, spoke in different tones, variety, and complex linguistic simplicity, quietly, angrily, tirelessly, indignantly. He spoke to me. You ain't gonna strangle me. This cultural piece of integrity, heritage is a package deal. If you wanna claim your legacy, take me to or leave it be. Slackness, utter madness, and a day in your stupidness. Queen's English. You find I look like a queen, king, prince, or royalty? Where? I is just a Grenadian from the West Indies, speaking dialect with originality. I say they trying to hold you and say we talk wrong. Teacher playing brainwash song, the drone drums from long, long with concrete jungle hum. They ask she to use 3 words that start with D, with creativity. Here she. The horse jumped over a defense. Defeat before detail. No, I don't know about you, but I find that makes sense. It's not her fault the animal make movements. In her defense, appreciate the context of her freedom cry subtext. All bread out of cheese, all crab out of hole. So don't hold us back and train us not to get along. That it don't belong. That Creole only has writing in songs to whine and get on. Forward ever, backward ever. However, where have we gone? Bonje? Take it from me. I is just a Grenadian from the West Indies, speaking with pride and identity. But at first you just fret me and call for Maljo. We haven't forced you to stop. Oh, you feel it so. You don't have to use violence to strike blows to mama guy a man ego so that he suppose he don't know better than those who came and tell him bury he clothes himself and become a duppy clone. Studying the land without feeling it with the hand and claim to understand what's better than those who live and breathe it and encourage us to leave it. The roots he no fruit man does grow, instead eating burgers, Concoal, and Oreo. Well, don't choke now. I is just a Grenadian from the West Indies, speaking from my heart and my belly. When I hear my people talking all prim and proper, just because they're afraid to uncock their mouth stopper, I don't trust it. Throwing your tongue, your right, or your soul, selling on your land whole for foreigners' goals, when you used to be happy, all talking, working, and maybe burning some coals. But joke aside, I watching face. You think we talk though heavy place? I just play my cards. Look at the ace. All 4 rummies down my noses, sharp on their block was we base. Don't talk about the food we just make. You ever hear about Johnny Bakes? Sauce, crab, and callaloo, black sage, pilau, roast breadfruit, bread nut. You want a taste? Pick up the pace. When you hear a West Indian mother show her face, brace yourself. She can make big man heart race. With her look, she could end debate, make dogs skate. Much less when she opens she mouth. There! Again! Let the spit on the ground dry before you hang up those clothes outside and go end up with your eye well red tonight. But it's a disgrace. Watch. Don't get me wrong, eh? Standard English is okay. You feel I can't use those fancy words you just say? I could rock a lash of idiosyncrasy on your tail and speak just like you when the situation entails. But that's not enough. You want me frail to put the nail on the coffin that led to mental bloodshed. Suck your tongue, Polylot! He dead. Who here let the word spread? But why are you trying to steal with pride? Shame us. The one thing we get back from slavery and blame us. Yeah, it's time to reclaim us. You think that talk can reflect the same us? Come on in, huh? You ever drive, feel the moon pull you out of the way? Starlight bright, bright, making Musha flay with the night. And girl and boys dance and play. Summoned by one Mako flame. Then and stand and speak to crowd. Voice crackly, hard, sweet and loud. Echoing into the street. Family then was more concrete. Thick like pea soup was unity. Passing Nancy's stories painted by drum beat. Until the faint crick crack of the dust and sticks melted away like waterlogged creeks. But I don't think you can recall clearly what it sounds like to be a Grenadian from the West Indies, dynamic and comprehensively. Yes, he spoke to me, told me, and I didn't hear his cry open my eyes until those words from the other side of my heart all but died. But still, it whispers and roars as your tongue expires, your stories die, the end of Anansi Brazae, and Tim Tim Time. Because from the embers will roar a new fire, a new time, a new glory. My story, his story, her story, our story will begin anew. Thank you.
Talent. His story, her story, our story. Another piece that we can all identify with. At this time, we move on to another cultural item. A couple years ago when we had, on a day like this, same setting, same purpose, we were here, and Black Wizard shared with us his song, a tribute to Louise Langdon Little. And he made a call for the audience if there was anybody brave enough, to stand and sing with him. And a little boy decided that he was going to take up the challenge. And he did such a good job that, he was asked to sing along with Black Wizard. And Black Wizard knows that in his absence, his song is in capable hands. He has entrusted Chamar Marast to deliver his song, a tribute to Langdon Little. So let's welcome Chamar, a junior calypsonian. My son.
Good afternoon, everybody. X is known the world over as a civil rights leader, a black nationalist fighter. Every man was born of a woman, so who is this woman who gave birth to Malcolm? Louise Langdon Little, black nationalist fighter. Every man was born of a woman, so who is this woman who gave birth to Malcolm? Louise Langdon Little, a freedom fighter too, a pure-born Grenadian. She come from Ladigland. Louise Langdon Little must be remembered too. This piece was written and composed by the Black Wizard in honor of our very own Louise Langdon Little. As a young woman, she left Grenada. She migrated to Canada, looking for greener pastures. With the spirit of a dawn inside her, she became a Gavi follower, a Pan-Africanist fighter. Louise Langdon Little, a freedom fighter too, a pure-born Grenadian. She come from Ladigland. Louise Langdon Little must be remembered too. No longer should the contribution of this great woman be left in oblivion. Instead, our dear Louise Langdon should become a beacon for every black woman. Louise Langdon Little, a freedom fighter too, a pure-born Grenadian. She come from Ladigland. Louise Langdon Little must be remembered too. I thank you.
Yes, indeed. She must be remembered too. And part of the work that we're doing here this evening and beyond, and has been ongoing over the last 6 years or so, has been dedicated to memorializing, remembering, and honoring the legacy of our dear Helen Louise Langdon Little. At this time, we're moving into the second segment, and we're moving away from Grenada. When we left off in the first segment, we were already thinking about Uncle Ero away and Ocean somewhere else. And so in this second segment, we're going to reflect on Ocean's diaspora journey and the challenge of that particular journey for her. And so it's my pleasure again to welcome Dr. Merle Collins to read for us, and we'll follow up, like she said earlier, with some interrogation.
Forgot the second reading. Okay. Sorry, say something else while I find it.
We'd like to...
Just 1 minute.
I see some questions coming in from the online audience, which is wonderful to see, and we'd like to remind the online audience that you're welcome to ask your questions, and also for you, our in-house audience this evening, you will have a chance again at the end of this segment to ask questions of Dr. Collins. Also a reminder that Ocean Stirrings is here with us. You've had a first taste of it in the first segment, and I don't think there's any possibility of you leaving here without your copy. The author is also here with us to sign your copies. And so I see my auntie on the family chat, as she would always be, asking if she could buy a copy in Canada. Auntie, I have a copy and I'll get you a signed copy, so don't worry about that. But if you need a copy, also it does say where you can find copies in Grenada as well after today. So please do take advantage of the fact that Dr. Collins is with us today and get yourself a copy of Ocean Stirrings.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'll read from a section of the novel now. Ocean is in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia, New York area with her husband. They've just come down from Canada, and she is thinking about the second International Convention of the Negro Peoples of the World, which is a Universal Negro Improvement Association event. So she's married, she's just had her first child, so she's a young mother, but also a person interested in what is happening out there politically. And I shouldn't say but also, and also. One day, he tell her some of the things he heard about the period. And this he I'm speaking about here, this he in the novel, is her husband. One day, he tell her some of the things he heard about the period. Well, now they were going to Omaha, where this lynching had just happened, and where young white men back from the war were up in arms about everything, especially trying to make sure that Negroes know they don't belong in this country. They talked about that in the movement. And Cassandra had slipped her a 1919 article that came from a newspaper, the Springfield Republican. She has it nearby. Crowd lynches Negro at Omaha after long riot. Sheriff and deputies fight immense mob for 9 hours from top of burning courthouse. Then flames compel relinquishment of prisoner. Omaha, September 28th. William Brown, Negro, alleged to have assaulted a white girl, was dragged from the county jail at 11 o'clock tonight and hanged on an electric light pole following a struggle of 9 hours by an immense mob to wrest him from the sheriff. That story was part of all these race riots that they call the Red Summer, happening the same year she came into this frightening country. And it sounded like the man wasn't guilty of whatever offense they said he had committed. But guilt was not the point. Being black was the point. So they lynched this man in Omaha just not last year, the year before last. And a lot of other things like that have happened in Omaha and other places since then. It seemed that those doing the lynching know they can get away with it, even take people out of the hands of the police. Well, it's their police, and that is where she and Baron going, yes? Omaha. So she tells herself, don't feel so good that you're not going to the south. So that's one part of it, yeah? Something she's thinking about. And then here, they leave Philadelphia later than they planned. They don't want to miss the 31 days and 31 nights of the Second International Convention of the Negro Peoples of the World. Wilfred has won the heart of Cassandra, and she said that since her little darling was deserting her, she will give him all her free time during the month of August. So between that and her cousin in New York, Oceane is able to go to some of the celebration, though she's in the last 3 months of her pregnancy and a little nervous about her health these days. In the end, they decide to wait to hear Mr. Garvey's speech on the last day of the convention. Oceane always liked it when he linked the idea of the convention with emancipation. It emphasized that the convention of the Negro peoples of the world is happening during the month of August for a reason. Garvey says, some worked to bring about the emancipation because they saw the danger of perpetual slavery. They brought about the liberation of 4 million black people. They passed away, and the others started to work. But the opposition against them is too strong. The opposition against them is weighing them down. And now she's hearing about lynchings right where they are going, just hearing about it from far, and then feeling it all around you. These are two different things. To Oceane, Mr. Garvey's speech is as impressive as usual. Yes, emancipation. She is ready after this convention to begin the UNIA work in Nebraska. When she turns to look at Baron, she sees that his face is eager. She sees the light, the enthusiasm that she loves. After she tells him how much she admires Mr. Garvey as a West Indian for making the date of the convention remember emancipation, and they talk about how West Indian and North American experiences have been both the same and different, he asks, did you know that at one time there were Negro representatives in Congress from the South? When? It is clear from her smile that she doesn't believe him. Remember I said I would tell you more about Reconstruction? Well, that was it. After the Civil War, when the North saw how bad things were, after Southern whites were killing Negro people openly, there was a lot of pressure on emancipationists. After the Civil War, Negro men got the vote. It was a period called Reconstruction, so you had a few Negro people, and it was men, so you had a few Negro men in Congress. What? So what happened? Politics. Eventually, white people, North and South, got together and decided they have to assert white authority, so things get rolled back. Well, you all were ahead of us on that one. We don't have the vote in the Caribbean yet, and it's not about rolling back. We never had it. So, you all were ahead. Remember the things we talk about. It's not that one set ahead. True is about what white people in position see as their interests at any particular time. They make the rules to suit. Exactly. It is so good when they can talk like this and realize that they have the same interests, the same wish to struggle for their people's advancement. Perhaps they can get past this rough part of their journey together. She can't act as if suddenly everything is good again because she really cannot forget that he lied to her. But moments like this remind her that they think alike and they work well together from the Caribbean and the American South. Ah, well, thank ID. Time will tell. Okay, so you can see in this piece here, it's the relationship, it's the thinking about America being so different. It's the work with the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So it's everything in her life coming together in that piece.
Thank you again, Merle. So we have left La Digue, and we're in Philadelphia, heading to Omaha. But just at the end of the first segment, we were talking about how there was already a sort of conversation happening in Ocean's context in La Digue with people like Uncle Ero, with the figure of T.A. Marichaud, that was kind of shaping Ocean's own political consciousness, and that political consciousness was not formed at the point of migration. It's not that all of a sudden she got to Canada and she became this person. Rather, it was people like Ma, like Sir, like Mr. Ansel, like people around the community that shaped her political consciousness. And I want us to talk about why you highlight so much that Ocean's political formation is grounded in Grenada. It's a very Grenada-centric political formation, so that years later, and now I'm moving from the fictional to the real, Helen Louise's son Wilfred can say, we were reading the West Indian at the dinner table. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how it goes back to that then, precisely, that I thought it was important to show that this activism, this interest in the political, this interest in, how life is shaped by so many things didn't just happen in the United States. That the events in Grenada helped take her there. And there was something you said as you were talking, but and I thought I must comment on that, but it's gone. It will come back. That's a temporary senior moment. It will come back. But on the ship, from the beginning, she begins to realize different, things in different political ways too. Quite apart from Marichaud and, that kind of shaping that is happening for her political consciousness generally. On the ship, she is suddenly thinking, somebody says to her, you can go over to that side, which means that the person read her body as white. And she's thinking, well, I can't go, because if I go over there, if my grandmother were on the ship, she can't come with me, right? So she has this sense, she's thinking in these terms from then to, she's beginning to think about, not beginning to, because, it happened from school before, here in Holy Innocents, when the children were calling her Red Girl and Tiffy Rouge and all of that. But, she's thinking now about the body and the fact that there are all of these differences. And later on, and why I think it is important is because when we go forward to think about the shaping of her children, and all of the things that she says, that the children say, she told them, we realize it didn't just start in Canada or in the US with the Negro Improvement Association. It started long before that. And one little nugget in the autobiography, not in the autobiography, in Wilfred Little's writings that also always comes back to me, is Wilfred Little says, when Malcolm was in prison, he said to him, don't let the time do you. You do the time, and you make sure you study the dictionary, write things, learn things. You remember how Ma used to tell us different things? Think, what he says is, remember how Ma would do. And study inside here. So think of the influence then. And it's always amazing to me that as people celebrate Malcolm X as a great African-American thinker, it didn't come up generally that his mother was from Grenada. And we think of, you know, as I do the research, I think of the importance of the mother in the shaping of her children, even though she went into a mental institution at a point when they were quite young, that Malcolm had left the home, etc. But that early shaping seems to me tremendously important, and this is why I thought it was important to make that point. It begins from Grenada.
Interesting. And there's a next question here. When we see Ocean, she encounters a great deal of hardship and challenges in her diaspora journey, and we know that, you know, a lot of us, we aspire, or we always want to move out of Grenada, always going is like a bed of roses or a better life. And here we see that for Ocean, there was a great deal of hardship and challenges. And how does Ocean's diaspora journey, though, reflect ongoing concerns of Caribbean or Grenadian women in moving and trying to make life elsewhere?
All right. I think in the same way that when we talk about her Grenada journey and things that are rooted in Grenada, you know, we see that it speaks to the journeys of so many other Grenadian women in various ways. I think in the same way for travel, for the diaspora, Ocean is anxious. She leaves with anxiety. She's on the ship with a lot of anxiety. She's wondering what life will be like. In Canada, she begins to wonder what kind of man she will meet, you know, and all of that. So I think all of that, because it's a different stage of life's journey, and all of the anxiety that Ocean feels, I would say, is the kind of anxiety that people feel generally, you know, as they go through life. And certainly you asked specifically about Caribbean women. And yes, that Caribbean women feel as they go through life. And then from this passage that I read before, you could hear that there was some kind of conflict in her relationship. That there comes a point where she's thinking, he lied to me, I can't trust this man, right? And that again, you know, and one of the questions that she asks him then is, so how am I to understand this? Is there a special kind of Negro American way that you're doing things that I don't know about, right? So, you know, so that kind of thing, that kind of specificity, the national, are things so different here that I really can't understand them? These are the kinds of questions she's asking her husband when she becomes really upset with him. And for me, as I look at the fictional representation, of course, because I cannot say, you know, although some of the research tells me there were those kinds of conflicts, I cannot say how she dealt with it, how Louise Langdon dealt with it in the home. But here I have Ocean dealing with it in particular ways. And I think that too is true to the kinds of things that women experience as they try to engage with a different kind of reality, a diasporic reality.
We know that one well. I speak for myself here. I'm going to read this question because I want to read it out. One of the most beautiful and profound aspects of the book for me was a sort of stirring of the form of the novel itself. We begin in La Digue in a decidedly material geography. I'm a geographer, sort of, so La Digue, it feels like a place. The language and politics of the place are recognizably Grenadian. And as we journey away from Grenada, something transforms. We only hear Creole in Ocean's internal voice when she's speaking to herself, or maybe when she's writing letters to Ma. Eventually, we're in the ephemeral, we're in a place of the poetic. I really want you to talk to us about that particular use of form and what it does for the story that you want to tell and the way you want to tell it.
All right. Yes, I think that is a really very thought-provoking question, because yes, in the first part of the story, when we are in what Wizard refers to as Ladig land, and you know, when I heard that in the Wizard Calypso, I say, you know, that is really important. It emphasized the colonial thing, you know? It's not just, the space is not just Ladig, but Ladig land. And later I was realizing, yeah, people say Ladig land, and they used to say more also Bellevue land, you know, which emphasizes colonialism, which emphasizes the structure of society, you know, so all of that. So the first part of the novel is decidedly set in Ladigland, and you know, and in that area. So that's the reality. There's talk about people walking up waterfall, walking up the road, and then turning left and going. That there's a road in the back where you could go all over to Nyanga 4 and that kind of thing, so that you get those details in the novel. It is very rarely Ladig. Somebody else told me, look, this is not St. George's. You're talking about a rural area. I say, yes, it's Ladig. It's not St. George's. So again, you know, so that is very rare in the first part of the novel. And then later on, and then again the language, because I'm emphasizing the Creole, yeah, a lot, both English, both the Anglophone and the Francophone Creole. And by the way, when I'm saying Anglophone and Francophone Creole, I am also always conscious that these are the European languages, but melded into them as part of them. These were the people in charge, the French and the English. But then you also had the Wolof and the Yoruba, you know, so the African languages that came to help shape these Creole languages. So that is the first part of the novel. And then as she's moving away, she begins to write her grandmother, because her grandmother dies the year before she leaves Grenada. And she's on the ship writing these letters. And even as she writes the letters, sometimes she borrows language from the royal reader. And she's saying, Ma, I will write you what the royal reader calls a talking letter. So there's a passage in the royal reader indeed about writing a talking letter. But she's thinking, but whose talk? The royal reader talk or something, you know what I mean? Talk. Right, yes. or me and Ma talk, exactly. So there's also, she begins to think about issues of language on the ship. And then when she is in Canada, we see the language in constant transformation. She's looking out at the trees and she's saying, Ma, these trees on the here, there is what they call a paper birch. It's a nice tall tree, Ma. It reminds me of you. And it reminds me of the Bois Canoe. And, you know, and so she's kind of going back to that also. And her language there is the English, inflected sometimes with the French, because since she's in Montreal, she's also speaking up, and you would know that better than me, but she's also speaking a bit of the French and thinking, listening to how the people she's working for, because she becomes a maid in a home, and she's saying, they're saying all these things in French, thinking I can't understand. You know what I mean? But she understands because they speak French and, you know. So you can see her sensitivity to language. But when she writes and when she speaks, soon we are getting a more English-inflected, by the time she goes into the US, we are getting a more English-inflected thing. And it is the internal world now that is the world of the Creole. And that was an interesting part for me to write too, because I'm thinking, of all that she is going through, especially when she starts to have African American children, and their frame of reference is also very different. And when I read Malcolm saying, my mother's accent did not sound like a Negro's, I say, gosh, what is happening here? The Negro he's thinking of is the Black American. You see what I mean? So that is what Black accent should sound like, and his mother accent just didn't sound like that. You know what I mean? So those kinds of things, you say there's a certain thing of loneliness here for her, because her children also have a very different kind of experience. So yes, in the novel, things change. And I just want to add that, for example, sometimes she's surprised. It's obvious that sometimes she's speaking the Creole when she's alone with the children in the kitchen, because one day she hears her little girl all of a sudden say, Zafezo, Zafezo, and she looked back, because, so which means the child has heard her say Zafezo, you know? So these little things that kind of come to the child because of, so I played with these kinds of ideas of language, and yes, it changes constantly throughout the novel. And I'm putting this on because there was a point, oh yes, I wanted to say that, for example, when you think of the internal world of the Creole, let me just give you this little piece. For myself, when I first went to the US, I remember writing a poem that goes, and I'll just give you a little bit of it. The part of me that is there, not here, home, not wandering, not chicky baby, not hey sugar, how you doing honey, but Doodle darling, you all right? You know? So you see, that kind of language, thinking of the world in terms of language, I tried to do some of that in the narrative as well for her, because I'm sure there were moments of loneliness when she is the Grenadian voice, and she tells the children, there were, and Malcolm writes it in the autobiography too, that, you know, there are, I don't remember how many West Indians, but if it's 3 West Indians, there are 3 West Indians in this area. And she tells them the last names of the West Indians, you know, so that it is clear that she has her eye on the people from home as well.
You didn't try, you did it beautifully. I love the poetry at the end. I printed one out. This was my favorite one called I Lose Road. I really loved it. I really enjoyed it. Marie?
I think you should take the final question, Tesfa.
Okay. All right. So we are in a moment in Grenada. We heard earlier that we just celebrated our 50th anniversary of independence to much aplomb and to much spectacle. And in Grenada and in the collective of Grenada, including our diaspora, we are celebrating somewhat the event of political independence. And this question is very much in line with the mandate of the work that we're doing in this community and hopefully elsewhere. We're also a century past Ocean's first leaving Grenada, or more than a century. And I want you to help us think about what the role of, like Wizard said, remembering too our historical personalities like Louise Langdon. What is the role of this kind of work in nation building as a whole for Grenada?
Okay, I knew this nation building question was coming, so I kind of made a few notes myself thinking about it. But, you know, even before that, let me say, although Tesfa just mentioned that I Lose Road poem, and I didn't know she was going to do that, but she mentioned that I Lose Road's poem, and she didn't let you hear a little bit of it, but it goes something like, how I lose road, because at this point she is in the mental institution, because she ends up in a mental institution, you know, mainly because people weren't supportive of her, meaning the institutions of the state weren't supportive of her. So at a point when she needed, the psychiatrist actually said She's okay. She'll be all right in a while. She needs to rest. But the institutions of the state weren't supportive of black people generally, and of that family especially. So, you know, because they were Garveyites, etc., etc. So she ended up, I won't go into a long explanation, so she ended up in a mental institution. But in that poem that Tesfa mentions, she's saying, how I lose road. How I lose road from La Digue. You know, that idea. So even at that point, she's thinking back to home and thinking of, you know, this notion where I don't know if within your families you also have that saying, you know, I lose road. You know, I can't find my way, something gone wrong. So she's asking herself that question. So the nation building thing, and I'm pleased that you asked, not just about memorializing Helen Louise Langdon, but, you know, thinking about nation building generally and memorializing the legacies of historical figures like Helen Louise. Because when nation building is concerned, I am struck by the fact that there are so many of these figures to be memorialized. I suppose even as I was growing up, I was struck by the political work that's not called political that women very often do in communities, you know, within the home, because women are the ones responsible for that kind of socializing generally, or considered responsible, and there's so much political work that goes on there. So it seems to me that as we memorialize those who, for one reason or other, come to our attention, we are drawn to think of the quiet contributions of others. The many quiet actors on a stage on which the male political actors are usually the most recognized. So we have to come to, while we continue recognizing the male political leaders, you know, especially when we think, okay, they're going good, but we also have to recognize the important work that is being very often done on what we might think of as a personal level by the women. Think of the political contribution that in that personal political space. And then also there are the historical figures, the oceanic figure. And remember that name, because remember Ocean, because Ocean is meant to emphasize the ocean, the people who came out of the ocean, you know, the importance of the Atlantic Ocean in our stories, the importance of the Atlantic Ocean in the story of Ocean, because the name Ocean itself is Creole, right? It's a Creole word for ocean, used more in Haiti than other places, which is what my Dominican student told me, but it's a Creole word for ocean. So Ocean in the novel is that oceanic figure carrying the history, the histories of people who came from the ocean. And as I look at the people who, according to her children, had an impact on her here, as we think of nation building, I mention again T.A. Marichaud. And Wilfred Little writes that she gave us Garvey's paper to read. And as I trace the line, you know, I see that Ocean's life and Louise Little's life takes me to this so many important figures and the shaping, the patterns of generations. Marichaud, let's go back to this point, was 23 years old in 1910 when Louise Langdon was 15. He was a young political thinker whose views stayed with her so much that, you know, we hear from Wilfred Little later on. And as we think of the story of Grenada today, we must always honor, it seems to me, those who emerged at a time when the colonial government was only just beginning to put in place those various ordinances that I talked about for education. So this journey to Louise Langdon's story takes me also to Grenadian Alistair Hughes, who wrote about Marichaud to tell me that Marichaud left school at 16, the importance of Donovan and all of that. So there's so many figures whom we remember during this national moment. And one last point I want to make here is that as we think of these different political figures, all right, we see the importance of young people in the shaping of so many things. Marichaud, and you know, each young generation, because Marichaud was 28 when he started the West Indian in 1915, yeah? And as people have been celebrating the nation, people keep mentioning Eric Gary. Eric Gary was 29 in 1951. Morris Bishop was 29 when the NJM was formed in 1973. So you see what is happening here? For each generation, whatever the political ideas, each generation is coming up to shape things, you know, or to help with some new perspective. So it seems to me that we have to listen. When today we say, for example, that Louise Little had a standard 5 education, we're talking about the 1890s to 1912, you know, and that standard 5 primary school education was a very important one. And I said a long time ago that the last point, but let me tell you, the Legislative Council minutes are fascinating to me, the Legislative Council minutes of that early part of the 20th century. When they're talking about schools, they talk about having the more important schools, having the upper division schools. You know, in places like in the countryside, you could have the lower division schools. But I quote, you could have the upper division schools, they need more upper division schools in, and this is the quotation, the more important centers of population. So, you know, so today, when I hear people talking, and I heard the Prime Minister talking about tongue and the decisions that are being made there, and that we have to think about the countryside as well, I say, okay, because that comes from colonial times, the perception that tongue is always more important. And it's actually said in the Legislative Council minutes, the more important centers of population. So when we read our history, we see, we see how things were thought about and generally talked about. And the very last point, I assure you, in the Grenada Handbook and Directory, there is this. The English language is universally spoken, a direct quotation, but the peasantry speak among themselves a French patois, commonly known as Creole, which closely resembles the French patois of the southern states of North America and of the other West Indian islands, which were formerly occupied by the French. The use of this patois in the schools is strictly forbidden. All right? So that's a direct quotation from the 1897 handbook, just around the time when Louise Little is beginning to go to school. So it tells you something about how we have been shaped, our perceptions of language, our perceptions of the colonial government as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I will never interrupt. You could have 100 last points. I would never interrupt this flow of greatness. Thank you so much again, Dr. Collins. We've come to the end of the second segment.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do have a question from online that I want to ask. It's coming from our good friend Snowy, Martin Felix, and is asking if there was any evidence that Helen Louise, that the historical figure of Helen Louise, was in contact with her Grenadian relatives after moving away from Grenada.
Yes, there was. Yes, there was evidence that she was in contact with her Grenadian relatives. Terrence, why aren't you here? But Terrence told me about that kind of contact being made. And also her uncle, writing back from Canada. And they actually sent, and this was apparently Louise and Edgerton, sending to ask for support for the Garveyite movement over there. So she was in contact with her Grenadian relatives. And in addition to that, her Grenadian, later on, when she was in the mental institution, her Grenadian relatives were in contact with her. Let me say that her aunt here had, before Louise left, she had started helping her aunt take care of the children, because her aunt was having children at that time. Her aunt's first son was called Malcolm. So this is where Malcolm X's name comes from, right? Her second son was called Wilfred. So that's where the name Wilfred that Louise Langdon gives to her other son comes from. So you see, there was a lot of, she was reaching back mentally as well, and she was always in touch with them. And I just want to say Snow is the one who is asking that question. And in fact, just his asking the question reminds me, because I know the connection there, reminds me that Caldwell Taylor was someone who Snow knows well. Caldwell Taylor was someone who told me, look, you got to go to Montreal. And when I spoke to him about how Malcolm's book made me want to research Louise, he said, well, it's not only Malcolm. Look for Wilfred. Look for what Wilfred said. And that's how I started the journey to Wilfred as well. So yes, there was contact back and forth.
Wonderful. Any questions from our in-house audience? We're fully satisfied? That's good. I assure you that there is a lot more that we haven't touched in these two segments. I, in fact, didn't speak about my favorite part of the book. I didn't ask a question about that. So that tells you that there's so much more to enjoy about the book. But at this time, we're going to close things off for the evening. Marieve, I'm going to pass things back to you.
Okay, thank you. And I must extend, you have a question? Oh, okay. Right, so, a question? Okay.
Very briefly, it's not on this particular work, but I just wanted to ask you about writing in general. When did you start writing, and when did that career come to your mind, and how did you go about doing it? Very briefly.
You can hear so far that I have a problem with being brief with answers, but I'll try. From the time that I was at school, I knew that I had an interest in writing. I never thought of writing as a career because I suppose we didn't have models, so I didn't think I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know what that was. But at school, I wrote in the school magazine, for example, when I was at school in St. George's. I started off school at a pre-primary school in Hermitage, and I had a very strict teacher who, even then, until I was 7, I was in Hermitage until I was 7, and who even then would make you scribble little things, and say, that is your writing. So just going back to that, the importance of that. But the first thing that I wrote and left on paper was in tongue at the convent. And I wrote, there was a teacher I admired, and I wrote about that. I wrote a kind of essay about that. And I remember Jacqueline Kreft, who was an older girl in school who was very kind of activist and critiquing everything. She looked at my essay, she read it, and she said, "Girl, what kind of thing you writing there?" So I remember that first response to something that I left on paper. But she was joking, and afterwards she sat and, we talked about it a little bit. But the beginning was there. And then later on in a place called, with Judy Williams, in a place called Paul's Camp, there were these, and that, I think, is when I started to think writing. Because there were people coming from various parts of the Caribbean in writing workshops, and that really helped.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much to everyone present here this evening. And we are at the end of this evening's session, and I trust that it was informative, entertaining, and enlightening. I want to make special mention and say special thanks to Merle Collins for her great work and capturing in her historical fiction, I must say that, Louise Langdon Little, so that she will be remembered and commemorated. Also to Miss Abina Vincent from Grenada and to Miss Marisol Joseph, the principal of Holy Innocents Anglican School, Miss Claudia George Andrew, and Miss Jacqueline Smith, representative from the Independence Committee, and to all of you again, those working behind the scene, to our communications team, thank you for making this event possible. And as I thank CBI Rainbow City All-Stars, I would like to invite them to start playing again, because we have a special moment, and it would be nice to have it done with sweet pan music in the background. So I would like to invite...
Little announcement before we go there, just if you would permit me. As you know, the work of the Institute for People's Enlightenment is never done. It is ongoing. In this particular instance, this is work that we began 6 years ago, and that is going to continue. This is the 6th year of lectures, memorializing and commemorating the legacy of Helen Louise Langdon and Malcolm X. And for next year's lecture, we've already secured our next lecturer in the person of David Austin, who's a Canadian professor working on Black Canada, specifically Black Canada in the 1960s and the social and political context there, thinking about things like the writers' workshop that was held in 1968, thinking about Sir George, all of these historical figures that we're thinking with here, Malcolm X and so on, their impact on Black conscious movements in Montreal. So he has something to add to the Montreal conversation as well. And just to add to the list of people that we are thanking this evening, we want to thank Miss Esther Fleury for providing the beautiful flowers that you see here, the Rainbow Inn for providing the decoration and the furniture for the event, Miss Dilma Wickham from Grenada, who was instrumental in mobilizing people for the event, Mr. Richie Olivier, who's here with his team, live streaming this event, and your sister for having us be serenaded with the beautiful music of the CBI Rainbow City All-Stars, and of course to you, our beautiful audience. Thank you so much for being here. Those of you who are here in person and online, it's not over yet. You get a chance to buy your book and get it signed by the author herself. So again, thank you for this evening, and we can proceed with the music.
All right, and as we start, I invite Ms. Jacqueline Smith, the representative from the National Organizing Committee for 50th Independence Celebration, and she would like to do the honors, Dr. Merle, to pin you with our 50th anniversary pin.
NC would like to pin you with a 50th anniversary pin. And we hope that you will cherish it. I would like to say probably hold it for the next 50. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I will hold it for the next 50. All right.
Don't forget your mom is 103.
Yes, yes, I'm doing that. And thank you all for your questions and everything, because the pin to me is a part of all of this. And thank you for all of the questions which help now and in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And remember, we have books available for purchase and sign-in. CBI, Rainbow City All-Stars.